In this video, we are talking about 10 players that you must start in week 8 of fantasy football. But before we get into it, if you can please like the video, subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it. Starting at number 10 with Tank Dell. Yes, he scored 0 fantasy points last week. He completely busted. He was horrible. Everyone wants to throw him on their bench after that performance, and I don't blame you. But I really don't think he should be on your bench this week. And let me tell you why. A lot of what happened last week, outside of dropping that touchdown in the first quarter, was not his fault. CJ Stroud had no time to throw the football against a relentless Green Bay pass rush as he faced a pressure on 51% of his dropbacks and saw a season-high 61% adjusted completion rate, which was a season low, which resulted in 86 passing yards for Stroud. And that just won't be the case this week against the struggling Colts defense, who ranks 30th in pressure rate. And Dell still leads the team in first read target share at 37.5% over the last 2 weeks, along with ranking 6th in separation and route win rate against single high, and should absolutely shred this Colts secondary that has allowed the 12th most receiving yards per game to perimeter receivers. I get it if you want to bench Tank Dell. I just think he has a massive bounce back game in an easy matchup. I think this is a really good offense that was not happy with what happened last week against Green Bay. I think Dell has a big game. I think Stroud has a big game. Joe Mixon, Diggs, I think this entire offense eats. I'm predicting at least 6 catches, over 75 yards, and a touchdown for Dell in week 8. At number 9, DeAndre Swift has been incredible over the last 3 weeks as he's averaged 23.8 fantasy points per game, along with a touchdown in every one of those games. He's RB16 on the year, 15th in opportunity share, 13th in snap share. DeAndre is not just being used on the ground either. They're starting to get him involved in the passing game, which is really good to see as he has earned 4+ targets in 4 out of 6 games this year. This Bears offense looks a lot better. Shane Waldron is doing a better job at calling the plays. Caleb Williams is looking like a first overall pick quarterback, so that's all helping. Swift being in a good environment, in a good ecosystem, on a good offense is going to lead to a lot of opportunities, a lot of touchdowns, which is what's happening right now. Do you remember the first 2 weeks when everyone was just writing Swift off, calling for Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson? And yeah, DeAndre has had some easy matchups over the last couple of games. His advanced metrics, like his missed tackles forced, yards after contact, aren't great, but he's getting the opportunities. He's still a good back. He can catch the ball, and he's on a good offense. So you have to continue to start him, and he's set up for another monster game in Week 8 against the Washington Commanders, who have allowed the 12th highest explosive run rate and 4th most yards per carry to running backs. At number 8, Devonte Smith, another guy coming off a dud performance last week, but a lot of his struggles were more game script than anything, as the Eagles really didn't have to do much to beat the Giants. I mean, Jalen Hurts only threw the ball 14 times, and oh yeah, it helped that your running back, Saquon Barkley, ran for $176 and a touchdown against his former team. You could tell that he was running with a different type of anger last week. It was good to see for Barkley owners. He has been incredible this year, but Devonte hasn't been bad in his own right either. Yes, you can argue that he hasn't had to deal with competing with A.J. Brown for targets over that stretch when Brown was out with a hamstring injury, but he still has 14.9 fantasy points or more in every game this season outside of last week, and is sporting a 23% target share, 31% first read share, and with Dallas Goedert expected to be out again with that hamstring, it's going to be a condensed passing attack with A.J. Brown and Smith, and this should be a high-scoring affair against the Cincinnati Bengals. We know the Bengals offense can put up points, and we know the Eagles defense can be beat through the air. So if this is a high-scoring game, Devonte Smith is going to be heavily involved in this one. And it's a good matchup as the Bengals have allowed the 10th most receiving yards per game to perimeter receivers. So yeah, it stinks that Smith didn't do anything last week, but I would make sure that you are starting him this week. At number 7, Javante Williams went off last week. He had his best game of the season, over 100 total yards, 2 touchdowns, 26 fantasy points. He was the RB5 on the week. He has 16 plus fantasy points in 2 out of his last 3 games. He's really starting to turn it on. He's starting to look like pre-injured Javante a little bit. He is definitely looking better as he ranks 11th in missed tackles forced per attempt, so that's nice to see. This is really about the matchup and riding the hot hand. Like, this backfield You don't have to worry about Jaleel McLaughlin. You don't have to worry about anyone else in the backfield. It's the Javante Williams show. He's the workhorse. Is it a great offense? No. But they are feeding Javante, and he is making the most of his opportunities, so that holds value in fantasy. And you just can't pass up on another easy matchup. Play your running backs against the Carolina Panthers no matter what. That's probably the easiest lesson that we have learned this year, as the Panthers have allowed the most yards and touchdowns to running backs this year. So start Javante in a good matchup, ride the hot hand. I'm expecting another big performance. At number 6, Jaylen Waddle. This is all about Tua returning. This Miami offense obviously gets a massive boost. Tyreek Hill, Waddle, Achane should all have really big games. And this offense has been really bad without Tua. Waddle has averaged 47 receiving yards and 0 touchdowns over 12 career games without Tua. But this week, we are all going to be reminded how potent of an offense this is. Obviously, monitor Tyreek Hill's status. I'm assuming he's going to play. I think everyone's going to be out there. But if Hill is limited in any way, then that's going to be a nice boost for Waddle. But regardless, if they're both in or if Hill's out, Waddle is going to eat. I think this offense is going to just go crazy against Arizona, as they haven't been playing good football. They have a losing record. I just think they go off. So this is about Tua being back, Waddle being very talented, and the matchup being nice against the Cardinals, who have allowed the 8th most fantasy points per game to receivers. At number 5, Jordan Mason has cooled off drastically over the last 3 weeks and hasn't scored more than 9.2 fantasy points or a touchdown in any game over that span. Obviously, suffering that shoulder injury in week 6 hasn't helped the situation at all for Mason, but we know when he's fully healthy, he's been one of the best backs in football this year and should be able to turn things around on Sunday Night Football against a struggling Cowboys defense that won't have their best player in Micah Parsons. The Cowboys ranked 29th in DVOA versus the run. They've been really bad across the board. Mason is only getting healthier. He looked pretty solid last week as well. In San Francisco, offense, wide receivers are not getting healthier. Ayuk out for the year. Debo is questionable. Juwan Jennings has already been ruled out. Ricky Pearsall will be out there, but it would not shock me at all if San Francisco leans on the run game, leans on Mason. I just think he's going to be a big part of what they're looking to do this week because of all the injuries to the receiving core. And Dallas has allowed 4 different running backs to score 16 plus fantasy points against them. Mason is going to have a big day, especially with Christian McCaffrey probably set to return soon. I just think Jordan capitalizes on his opportunities. Shoulder hopefully isn't bothering him anymore. Matchup is really good. Primetime game. Get Mason in your lineup even though he has not played well over the last 3 weeks. At number 4, Amari Cooper played 33% of the snaps in his season debut with the Buffalo Bills. He only ran 12 routes, but somehow turned that into 16.6 fantasy points on 4 catches, 86 yards, got into the end zone on 5 targets. Just imagine what Cooper is going to be able to do when he's running 80%, 90% of the routes, which is probably what's going to happen this week, attached to Josh Allen in a passing offense that really needs him. They don't really have that go-to guy in the passing game, but that is what Cooper is going to be going forward. Even with no DK Metcalf in this game, I do still think it could be high scoring, which would be nice for Cooper because he would probably have a ginormous game. And the matchup is nice as well, as Seattle is allowing 259 passing yards per game over the last 4 outings. 8th most PPR points per target, 2 perimeter receivers. So you're obviously starting Amari, right? Like, he probably was on your bench last week, and rightfully so, because we didn't know how many routes he was going to run. So you're probably dying to put him into your lineup this week. And I just think he's going to have a monster game. Like, I'm talking 8 catches, over 100 yards, and a touchdown. At number 3, Jake Ferguson was a major letdown in week 6 before Dallas went on their bye. He only had 3 receptions for 11 yards against Detroit, but they were also getting blown out. It seemed like the starters on offense quit. I believe they were benched early as well. So what do you expect? Ferguson still having a solid year. Tight end 8 in fantasy points per game. We know he got injured earlier on in the season, but he still ranks 5th in deep targets among tight ends. And he's the second option in this Dallas passing attack, which is still really good with Prescott at the helm. It's also always smart to bet on players coming out of a bye. They've had an extra week to get their mind right, to rest, to game plan, and it's going to be a big matchup. Could be a high-scoring affair against the 49ers. San Francisco's defense also utilizes 2 high safeties at the 8th highest rate. That is good news for Ferguson, because when defenses do run too high, Ferguson eats on offense, as he has a 28% target per route run rate against those 2 high looks. So I just think Ferguson is going to have a really big game. We know Lamb is going to draw a lot of attention, a lot of the defensive attention, leaving Ferguson in these good situations. And Dak is also going to be peppering him with targets all day long. They're going to need Ferguson to have a big game. And I think Fergie finds the end zone in this one. At number 2, Tua Tagovailoa is finally back. We talked about him when we talked about Jaylen Waddle. As like I said, I'm expecting this Miami offense to have a field day. And Tua, we know when he's healthy, when he's on the football field, he's a really good quarterback. And he's usually leading in some passing categories every single year. And before he got hurt, he ranked 1st in highly accurate throw rate, 8th in yards per attempt. Obviously, make sure that Tyreek Hill is playing, but I think regardless, if you have Tua, you have to play him, right? You've waited this long for him to come back. That time is finally here. And Tua should have no problem dismantling this Arizona defense, as they are allowing the 8th highest yards per attempt and success rate per dropback, along with the 4th highest passer rating. So if you have Tua, you feel pretty good. He's got a good matchup. He's on a loaded offense. He's a really good player. And I think he's going to be a top 5 quarterback this week. So get him in your lineup, start him with confidence, and expect a big game. At number 1, Jayden Reed is coming off his worst game of the season in week 7. He hasn't given us those big blow-up games as of late. He's been dealing with an ankle injury, and last week he just didn't have it. 2 catches, 10 yards, 3 fantasy points, and had that really bad 40 to 50 yard drop right before halftime that would have kind of made you feel a little bit better about this performance. But nonetheless, this is not the time to bench him. Please don't bench Jayden Reed. Please. He's still on one of the best offenses in football, attached to a red-hot quarterback in Jordan Love, who has thrown multiple passing touchdowns in 11 straight games going back to last year. And outside of last week, Reed has still had a really strong year, especially when Love is under center. He's 3rd in yards after the catch, 7th in total touchdowns, 8th in yards per route run. He's a really good player on a really good offense with an elite quarterback at this point. These are guys that you don't bench because you're mad or because he had a bad game. These are guys you stick with them. You put him in your lineup because he's going to bounce back. And look at the matchup. The Jaguars, terrible defense across the board, and they have allowed the 6th most points per game to the position. So get Reed in your lineup. It's a no-brainer. Forget about last week and expect him to have a blow-up game in week 8. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you took away anything from the video, if you could please like the video, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out more than you know, and I will see you in the next one.